Hello, everyone. Tonight, we tell a medieval love legend. In this tale, set in 1242 at Château de Vitry, Knight Lionel was enchanted by Lady Isabella at the tournament. He sent messages through lilies of the valley, gifted her a wolf's tooth, read forbidden books with her in the abbey, and they agreed to run for freedom at harvest time. Let this medieval love, hiding sincerity and promises, carry you to sleep. It was late spring in the year 1242, and the morning mist over the Champagne region still carried moisture from the Seine River, shrouding the stone towers of Vitry Castle. Outside the castle walls, the tournament field had been trampled into silence by horse hooves. 12 banners embroidered with family crests fluttered in the wind. Among them one particularly eye-catching banner, the silver background with a red lion crest belonging to Sir Lionel, the youngest knight under the Duke of Burgundy. On the viewing stand, Lady Isabella twisted the edges of her silk handkerchief into tight folds. Her gown was embroidered with 3 golden irises, the exclusive emblem of the French king's niece. But she had secretly added clusters of lilies of the valley in silver thread at the hem, her mother's favorite flower that now only existed in her memories. Maid Margaret followed her gaze and whispered with a smile, "Is my lady looking at the Red Lion, Knight?" He knocked off 3 opponents' helmets during training yesterday. Lady Isabella's eyelashes trembled slightly. She indeed was watching Lionel. The knight's armor gleamed coldly under the sunlight, but couldn't conceal his taut waistline when he reined in his horse. When the herald cried out, "The joust begins," his steed reared up on its hind legs, and as dust kicked up from the hooves, his gaze beneath the helmet accurately found her position on the viewing stand through the sea of heads. The sharp, clashing sounds of the jousting lances made the wooden fences vibrate. Lionel's lance grazed past his opponent's breastplate, and with a whistling sound, knocked away the opponent's shield. Cheers erupted from the stands, but Isabella's heart skipped a beat. She saw that the knight intentionally let his cloak fall open slightly when turning around, revealing a small lily of the valley embroidered on the lining. This was no coincidence. 3 days earlier, in the castle corridor, she had dropped a silk kerchief embroidered with lilies of the valley. When she chased after it, she only saw the back of a knight disappearing quickly through the archway, the hem of his cape exactly this shade of gray. "He won!" Margaret exclaimed excitedly, pulling Isabella back to reality. Lionel was dismounting and kneeling on one knee to receive the Duke's blessing. His helmet was removed by an attendant, revealing his sweat-drenched golden hair and blue eyes, as clear as the spring waters of the Seine. When the Duke handed him the victory wreath, he suddenly raised his hand for silence. According to tradition, the victor has the right to request a token from one of the ladies present. Lionel's voice came through the lingering warmth of the helmet with a metallic quality. "I humbly ask Lady Isabella to grant me the sash at your waist." Complete silence fell over the crowd, so quiet that the wind through the banners could be heard, instinctively covering her waist. Isabella realized it was a green silk sash, woven with threads of emerald color, adorned with 2 small pearls at the end, a gift from her father when her marriage contract was arranged. And her fiancé was none other than the Count of Champagne, who had just been unhorsed by Lionel today. Margaret whispered urgently in her ear, "My lady cannot give it. The Count will be furious." But Isabella had already undone the sash. As she threw the sash onto the tournament field, she saw Lionel catch it, and in that instant, The flash in his blue eyes burned brighter than the sunlight reflecting off his helmet. Night draped itself slowly over Vitry Castle like a velvet cloth soaked in ink. Isabel sat before her dressing table, gazing at her flushed cheeks in the copper mirror. Margaret was removing the pearls from her hair while murmuring about the day's excitement. When the Count fell off his horse, his face turned purple. He'll surely complain to the Duke. What can he complain about? Isabel asked softly, her fingers tracing the lilies of the valley on the windowsill. It is tradition for a knight to ask a lady for a token during a joust. But he is Leonard. Margaret lowered her voice. They all say he is a bastard, his mother a gypsy dancer. If it weren't for the Duke's mercy, he wouldn't even have entered the knighthood. Your engagement is personally arranged by the king. How can you... So what if he's a bastard? Isabel turned abruptly, candlelight flickering in her eyes. Are there no vile souls among the nobility? This sentence cut through the air like a sword drawn from its sheath, silencing Margaret instantly. She knew why the princess was so agitated. 3 years ago, it was precisely her noble fiancé, the Count of Champagne, who intentionally startled her horse during a hunt, causing her to break her collarbone. At that time, Leonard was still a squire to the Duke, and he was the first to rush over, using his shield to catch her as she rolled down the hill. There was a soft knock at the window. Instantly, Isabel blew out the candle and signaled Margaret to open the window. Moonlight poured into the room like flowing water, and Leonard's figure appeared beneath the window, holding a pot of the lilies of the valley she had looked at during the day. I found them in a corner of the garden, he said in a low voice, handing the flower pot through the window. Knowing how much you like them. As Isabel took the flower pot, her fingertips accidentally touched his gloves. Those gloves were stained with dirt from the jousting ground, yet surprisingly warm. Thank you for today. Her voice was barely audible. But please return the ribbon, because I know it was a gift from the Count. Leonard interrupted her, pulling out a small cloth pouch from his chest. May I exchange this for it? Inside the pouch was a wolf tooth wrapped in silver thread, its tip smoothed and rounded. This is from my first boar hunt. His blue eyes sparkled with sincerity under the moonlight. It would protect you better than pearls. Isabel's fingers traced the grooves of the wolf tooth, suddenly recalling her mother once told her that the gypsies believed wolf teeth could ward off misfortune. Looking up, she met Leonard's gaze. There was no calculation or hypocrisy in that look, only the frank passion of a wild breeze. At dawn tomorrow, when the monastery bell rings for morning prayers, I will wait for you in the cloister. Leonard stepped back, his cloak making a soft rustle on the grass. I have something to tell you about the lilies of the valley? Isabel picked up his unfinished words, a smile unconsciously curling her lips. The knight's ears turned red immediately. About us, he said seriously, then turned and disappeared into the shadows of the trees. Margaret, standing beside her, was frightened pale. Princess, you cannot go. If discovered, I know my limits. Isabel held the wolf tooth tightly in her palm. Moonlight filtered through the window onto her face, casting a previously unseen determination. Some things are more important than engagements. The morning bells rang like a string of silver beads rolling from the monastery tower. Isabel, wrapped in a heavy cloak, hurried along the shadows of the cloister. the statues of saints cast patchy shadows on the stone walls from the candlelight, reminding her of ghost stories she heard as a child. Tales of pagans burned by the church and spectral knights wandering at night. Leonard was already waiting by the statue of Saint Joseph. He had taken off his knight's armor and changed into a gray monk's robe, looking like a young novice monk. "In this way, no one will notice," he explained with a smile, lifting the hem of his robe to reveal a leather-bound book hidden within. "I brought this for you." The cover of the book bore no title, only an iris's pattern in gold foil. Isabel flipped open the first page and immediately recognized it as a manuscript by Provençal poets. "This is the Romance of the Rose," she exclaimed, covering her mouth in surprise. "Isn't this banned for commoners to read by the church?" "There's a unique copy in the Duke's library." Leonard's finger pointed to a passage. "I secretly copied this section." That passage spoke of secret love between a knight and a princess, containing the following line: "The flame of love cannot be extinguished by the icy waters of status. Just as roses in thorny bushes bloom more fiercely towards the sun despite being restrained." Isabel's heart raced. She had seen fragments of this book in her father's study, but was scolded by the priest as blasphemous pornography. Yet reading these lines now, each word felt like Leonard's gaze, gently caressing the heart oppressed by social conventions. "I know about your engagement." Leonard's voice grew deeper. "The Count of Champagne needs your family's power to consolidate his position, while your father requires his army to fight against England. But Isabel, what do you want?" This question acted like a key, unlocking thoughts she had never dared to touch. She recalled every time the Count looked at her, his eyes evaluating her like a piece of jewelry. She remembered the ladies at court warning her that a woman's duty was to marry, bear children, and remain silent. But these were not what she wanted. "I want to ride through the vineyards of the Loire Valley," she said softly, her voice filled with longing. "I want to watch the sunrise by the river at dawn. Read all the books forbidden by the church. I want to be a real Isabel, not just someone's princess." Leonard took her hand. His palms bore thick calluses from years of wielding swords, yet they provided unexpected comfort. "What if I say I can take you away from here?" His blue eyes shone with determination. "I have a farm in Provence, with hillsides covered in lavender. You can read all the books you want there, and no one will care whether you're a princess or not." Tears welled up in Isabel's eyes. She knew how dangerous this promise was. A knight abducting the king's chosen bride could be stripped of his rank at best, or hanged at worst. Yet, looking into Leonard's determined eyes, she suddenly felt a reckless courage. By harvest time, she withdrew her hand and placed the wolf tooth in his palm. "When the castle guards go to supervise the tenants in the fields, we can leave unnoticed." Leonard tightly gripped the wolf tooth as if it were their pact. "I will prepare everything." He bent down and kissed her forehead lightly, like dew falling on a petal. "I swear by the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I will show you the lavender fields of Provence." Footsteps echoed from the end of the cloister. Leonard quickly slipped the leather-bound book into her cloak before vanishing into the morning mist. Feeling the warm pages against her chest, Isabel seemed to sense his lingering body heat. The saint's statues remained silently watching her, and she knew from this moment on Her fate was tightly bound with that knight whose eyes were blue like the sea. When autumn winds swept leaves over the castle spires, Isabel often gazed toward the south. There lay unread poems, unseen lavender fields, and a promise about thorns and roses waiting to be fulfilled. The scent of harvest season, like fermented wine, permeated every corner of Vitry Castle. The tenants began to work busily in the fields, and as Isabella had anticipated, half of the castle guards were sent to supervise the harvest. While on patrol, Lionel took the opportunity to hide two fast horses under an oak tree across from the moat. Horse saddles filled with dried provisions beside them, purchased with 3 months' salary, which he had prepared for their escape. However, the eyes and ears of the Count of Champagne were more numerous than they had imagined. One afternoon, while Isabella was trimming lilies in the garden, Marguerite suddenly ran up, her face anxious, clutching a crumpled piece of parchment. "This was delivered by the Count's messenger," said the maid, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "He said it was found in Leonel's room. You should look at it quickly. This is clearly a map for elopement." As Isabella unfolded the parchment, the blood in her fingertips seemed to freeze. The route from Vitry to Provence was marked in vermilion, with small lilies drawn at each relay station. It was indeed Leonel's handwriting, but he would never be so careless as to leave such plans in his room. "It's a trap." Isabella hastily stuffed the parchment into her petticoat. "The Count deliberately let us see it, trying to force us to act prematurely." Before she finished speaking, hoofbeats were heard on the stone path. The Count of Champagne stood at the entrance to the garden, wearing a scarlet velvet coat, holding his horse's reins, 4 guards with long spears following behind him. "What is my fiancé doing?" His voice was as cold as ice, his gaze sweeping over those neatly trimmed lilies. "I heard someone has been visiting your window at night recently." Isabella forced herself to remain calm as she put down the shears. "The Count must be joking. Marguerite can testify that I have been embroidering every night." "Is that right?" The Count suddenly raised his hand, and the guards immediately presented a silver tray containing a wolf tooth wrapped in silver thread. "Then what about this?" He lifted the wolf tooth with the tip of his sword. "We found it in Leonel's armor yesterday. I've heard it's a gypsy talisman, a knight carrying a woman's trinket. Don't you think it's strange?" Isabella's heart seemed to pound against her ribs. That wolf tooth was one she had personally placed in Leonel's palm, now becoming a blade aimed at them. She saw the satisfaction in the Count's eyes. He didn't need solid evidence, just needed to sow seeds of suspicion in front of everyone. "Maybe he picked it up." Isabella lowered her eyelids, her voice soft as a sigh. "I lost one 3 months ago while hunting. Leonel was there too." This answer clearly caught the Count off guard. He snorted coldly, suddenly vaulting onto his saddle. "Tomorrow, I will suggest to the Duke that we move up the wedding. Before the harvest ends, you must become part of the Champagne family." The dust kicked up by the hooves settled on the lilies like a gray shroud. Marguerite slumped onto the stone bench, tears wetting her skirt. "Princess, we can't escape anymore. The Count has ordered extra guards to watch your room tonight." But Isabella suddenly straightened her back. She removed the pearl hairpin from her bun and pressed its sharp end against her palm. The pain made her thoughts exceptionally clear. "Go tell Leonel," she said without a tremor in her voice. "Tonight at midnight, meet me in the monastery cellar. We must leave before the wedding, even if we have to fight through the Count's sword. When dusk fell, Marguerite took Isabella's message and sneaked out the side gate of the castle. She should have followed the moat towards the knight's quarters, but instead turned into the Count's study halfway. There was temptation she couldn't resist. A bag of gold coins sufficient to buy a farm, and a pass to Paris. "You did well," the Count said, his fingers lightly brushing over the maid's hand as he accepted the message. "Once Lionel enters the monastery, he will be captured by my men. Then I will announce to the outside world that he tried to kidnap the princess, thus eliminating this bastard and making your mistress finally give up hope." Marguerite's gaze fell on the bag of gold coins, suddenly recalling that snowy night 3 years ago. Her brother had been beaten to death in the square for stealing a sheep from the Count's estate, while the Count merely watched the execution indifferently. Yet now, the metallic sound of those coins, like the whisper of the devil, made her swallow all guilt into her throat. "Will the princess suspect me?" she asked softly. "She's now full of nothing but thoughts of running away." The Count pushed a cup of wine toward her. "When she sees Lionel hanged at the city gate with her own eyes, she'll naturally understand who truly cares for her." Just as the third chime of midnight rang out, Isabella pried open the window latch with her hairpin. She changed into a coarse woolen cloak that Marguerite had prepared for her, hiding a small dagger beneath her skirt hem. It was her dowry left by her mother, reportedly having pierced the throats of 3 bandits. The monastery cellar was cold and damp, the air filled with the smell of moldy hay. Lionel was already waiting there, holding an oil lamp, the light dancing in his blue eyes. "I bribed the cellar keeper. He'll pretend to patrol at dawn and let us escape through the secret passage." He reached out to embrace her, but she stepped back. "Marguerite said you were being watched by the Count's men." Isabella's voice echoed in the empty cellar. "Shouldn't we change our route?" Lionel's eyebrows instantly furrowed. "Marguerite told you that?" He suddenly grabbed her wrist, the light from the oil lamp flickering across her face. "Did she dress you in this cloak? There's the Champagne family crest on the collar." As Isabella looked down, she suddenly heard heavy footsteps approaching the cellar entrance. The Count's laughter sounded like the hiss of a venomous snake. "Catch them. Remember not to hurt my fiancé." Lionel smashed the oil lamp against the stone wall, flames instantly igniting the dry hay stacked in the corner. In the thick smoke that rose, he pulled Isabella toward the depths of the cellar. "Follow me. The secret passage is behind the altar." Amidst the sounds of fire licking the stone walls and the shouts of the guards mixed with the Count's roar, Isabella followed Lionel into the narrow secret passage, her nails scraping blood from the rough stone walls. Yet she clung tightly to his clothes without letting go. When they finally rolled out from the exit at the other end of the tunnel, they found themselves in the center of a cemetery, moonlight casting the crosses like a forest of lances. "Your maid betrayed us." Lionel leaned against an old elm tree, catching his breath, his left arm wounded by an arrow, blood soaking through the gray monk's robe. "Now all the guards in the castle are searching for us." Isabella looked toward the direction of the distant castle, where lights were already burning. She suddenly remembered Marguerite's tearful eyes and that bag of gold coins, enough to buy a farm. Some betrayals, after all, had already taken root in silence. The road of escape proved harder than they imagined. During the day, they hid in the forest, eating dry bread, and traveled by moonlight at night. Lionel's arrow wound, without ointment, began to fester. When they reached the Loire Valley, Isabella had to tear off the hem of her skirt, dipping it in river water to clean his wound. 3 more days ahead, and we'll reach the gypsy camp. Lionel gritted a wooden stick between his teeth to endure the pain, sweat beading on his forehead. My mother's people are there. They have herbs to treat arrow wounds. Isabella then recalled that Marguerite had once mentioned Lionel's mother was a gypsy dancer. Looking at this knight in front of her who was enduring pain, she suddenly understood why he always carried a kind of wild tenderness. It was the careful kindness shown by those rejected by mainstream society. On the 3rd morning, they indeed saw colorful tents in a sunflower field. The gypsies were cooking meat in copper pots, children dancing around the bonfire, and a woman in a red dress was playing a lively tune on her mandolin. When Lionel spoke his mother's name, the woman suddenly put down her instrument and hugged his neck. My little lion has finally come home. The woman's earrings hung with small bells, jingling when she spoke. Your mother said on her deathbed that one day you would return with your beloved. Her tent was filled with dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, the air filled with the scent of mint and rosemary. When she used a silver needle to pierce Lionel's wound and squeeze out the black pus, Isabella couldn't help turning her head away. Don't be afraid, princess. The woman suddenly spoke, her eyes seeming to see through her identity. Among us, there are no nobles or commoners, only lovers. Around the bonfire at night, the gypsies danced retching lie. Lionel held Isabella's hand, teaching her to spin with the drum beat, her coarse woolen cloak sweeping past the flames, sparking tiny embers. When she accidentally stepped on his wound, he winced in pain, but smiled and said, "This hurts more than being pierced by a lance on the battlefield." But happiness was always short-lived. The next morning, a gypsy on watch hurried over and said he saw the emblem of the Count of Champagne. He had 50 cavalrymen with him, searching along the valley. The woman in the red dress immediately shoved a leather pouch into Isabella's hand. Inside are poppy powder and mandrake. Throw it into their eyes if you're in danger. She handed Lionel a curved knife. Follow the mountain path westward. There's an abandoned castle there where you can lay low. At the time of parting, Isabella suddenly embraced the woman. Thank you. She didn't know how to address this gypsy who had saved them, so she awkwardly repeated, "Thank you very much." The woman laughed and helped adjust Isabella's cloak. Remember, roses can still bloom even when they grow among thorns. The abandoned castle sat atop a cliff, its broken walls and ruins overrun with wild roses. Lionel blocked the only entrance with stones and built a watchtower on the tower top, using a telescope every morning to observe the movements in the valley. Isabella, meanwhile, found some moldy flour in the castle's cellar, mixing it with honey given by the gypsies to bake bread with a burnt taste. They were like 2 injured birds, tending each other's wounds in this forgotten ruin. Lionel's arrow wound gradually healed, leaving a jagged scar that Isabella thought more brilliant than any metal. They often sat on the edge of the cliff, watching the sunset, seeing the Seine River turn golden, as if they could glimpse the distant Provence. When the Count's pursuit loosens, we'll buy a farm. Lionel drew the outline of a house on the ground with a branch. There needs to be a lavender garden and a study filled with forbidden books you like. Isabella leaned on his shoulder, listening to the wind whistling through the cracks in the castle walls. I also want to raise a flock of sheep, wandering like the gypsies, making our home wherever we settle. But fate seemed to love playing tricks on them. One evening, Lionel suddenly cried out while on the watchtower. Isabella climbed to the top and saw a group of knights appear in the valley, their shields bearing the crest of the Duke of Burgundy. The Lord Lionel had once served. How could they find us here? Isabella's voice began to tremble. Lionel tightly held her hand, his knuckles white from gripping. It's my fault. The Duke must have been persuaded by the Count to bring me to justice. He suddenly turned around, pulling out the book, The Romance of the Rose, from his backpack. Take this book and leave first. Follow the small path down the cliff, and you'll meet the gypsy caravan. I won't go. Isabella pushed the book back, tears finally falling. We promised to see the lavender together. Lionel bent down to kiss away her tears, his movements gentle as if handling delicate porcelain. Believe me, I will find you, even if I have to cross mountains of blades and seas of fire. I will find you. He tied the wolf tooth around her neck again. This is our oath. It will never expire. The sound of the knight's hooves grew louder. Lionel gave her one last look before rushing toward the castle entrance. As Isabella climbed down the cliffside vines, she heard the clash of swords and Lionel's roar, and even the familiar bell-like laughter. The voice of the gypsy woman in red, who had come with her people to help. Nightfall enveloped the forest like a giant net. Holding the wolf tooth around her neck, Isabella ran into the darkness. She didn't know if Lionel could break through the encirclement or what awaited her ahead. But she knew, as long as the wolf tooth remained, their oath would never be broken. When the first rays of sunlight illuminated the forest, she encountered a caravan. The leader lifted his hood, revealing Marguerite's tear-streaked face. My lady, I'm sorry for betraying you. The maid pulled out a letter from her bosom. This is from Lionel. He said he'll wait for you in Provence. Isabella unfolded the letter, recognizing Lionel's familiar handwriting. It contained only one sentence. When the lavender blooms, all thorns will turn into roses. The sun of Provence poured like molten gold, spilling over the rolling lavender fields. Isabella sat in a cart loaded with olives, her fingers absently stroking the wolf tooth hanging from her neck. Marguerite's driving was awkward. The reins knotted several times in her hands. This maid who had once betrayed her was now her only companion. We're approaching X, Marguerite said cautiously, pulling the horse to a halt. According to Lionel's letter, there's a gypsy selling silverware at the market every Wednesday. I know, Isabella interrupted, her gaze fixed on the silhouette of a windmill in the distance. During these 3 months of fleeing, they had hidden in forests and monasteries, traveling across borders with merchant caravans. Marguerite had used that bag of gold coins to bribe their way through every checkpoint. And through countless nights of penance, she had slowly regained a fragile thread of trust. The clamor of the market surged like a tide. Spice merchants shouted their wares. Acrobats tumbled through the crowd, and monks in black robes carried crosses as they moved through the throng. Isabella adjusted her straw hat and searched for the silverware stall. When she finally saw the familiar silver bell earring beneath an old oak tree, her heart skipped a beat. The woman in red was weighing silver chains for a peasant woman when she spotted Isabella. Her eyes lit up instantly. My little Rose has finally arrived. She smiled and lifted the cloth beneath the stall, revealing a cellar entrance. He's been waiting for you down here for a long time. The cellar was filled with the aroma of aged wine. Leonel stood by an oak barrel with his back to the entrance. When he heard footsteps, he turned abruptly, and surprise sparkled in his blue eyes like starlight. His left arm was still bandaged. A faint scar marked his face. But none of this could dim the radiant light in his eyes. A light that remained blazing hot after crossing fire and longing. You came. Leonel's voice trembled slightly. He reached out but stopped midair, as if fearing it might all be an illusion. As Isabella rushed into his arms, all fear and waiting found their resolution. His embrace was still warm, carrying the scent of lavender and sunlight, though his shoulders were thinner than before. I knew you would find me, she murmured against his cloak, her voice thick with emotion. The woman in red coughed lightly and placed a clay jar on the table. This is honey wine made from last year's lavender, to celebrate your reunion. She winked. But you only have 3 days. The Count's men are already in Provence. 3 days were enough to say many things. They curled up together in a hay-filled attic, while Leonel recounted how the gypsies helped him escape, how he crossed swamps with an arrow wound, and how he prayed toward the south every full moon. Isabella told him how Marguerite had turned against her captors at the last moment, bribed every checkpoint with a sack of gold coins, and even shielded her from wild beasts in the forest. She's become a novice nun at the convent now, Isabella said, running her fingers along the edge of the jar. She says she wants to spend the rest of her life repenting. Leonel took her hand, his fingertips tracing the calluses on her palm, marks of their journey. Everyone has the right to choose, he said earnestly, just as we chose each other, no matter the cost. On the 3rd evening, they stood in the middle of the lavender field. The sunset dyed the sea of flowers purple red. Suddenly, Leonel dropped to one knee and pulled a ring made of woven lavender stems from his pocket. I don't have pearls or jewels, he said softly, his voice gentler than the evening breeze. But I have a heart willing to fight the whole world for you. As Isabella extended her hand, distant hoofbeats echoed. The banner of the Count of Champagne appeared faintly in the dusk, like an ominous black shroud. The woman in red rode up, waving a flaming torch. Follow me quickly. We've set traps in the eastern canyon. Leonel helped Isabella onto the horse and drew his curved sword. You go first. I'll cover the rear. This time, we face it together. Isabella tightened her grip on his wrist, her gaze as firm as iron. Either we live together, or we die together. In the dust kicked up by hooves, lavender petals swirled through the air. Side by side, they charged toward the canyon. Behind them, the Count's pursuers. Ahead, an uncertain fate. But their tightly clasped hands formed an invisible armor, shielding them from all fear. Moonlight sliced through the darkness like a cold blade. Leonel and Isabella crouched behind a large rock, watching as the Count's cavalry fell one by one into the gypsies' traps. Hidden ropes ensnared horses' legs, throwing knights to the ground. But the Count of Champagne was clearly prepared. He swung his sword, cutting rope after rope, roaring, "Catch that bastard!" I want him to watch his woman burn alive. Leonel gripped Isabella's hand tightly. I'll run out to distract them. You follow the gypsies through the secret passage. No. Before Isabella could finish, the woman in red covered her mouth. This is the only way, she insisted firmly. We've arranged a ship waiting for you in Marseille. Leonel gave her one final look. 1,000 words passed between them before he simply said, "Go." When the knight's attention shifted to Leonel, 2 gypsies led Isabella through the narrow secret tunnel. In the darkness, she could only hear her heartbeat and the increasingly distant sounds of battle. She didn't know whether Leonel would survive, so she repeatedly touched the wolf tooth around her neck, silently reciting their vows. At the end of the tunnel lay a beach. The salty sea breeze hit her face, and in the distance, a ship with black sails was anchored. The woman in red handed her a leather pouch. "This is from Leonel. If he doesn't make it, take this to Sicily. There are old friends of his mother there." Isabella opened the pouch and found the Romance of the Rose, along with a sketch of a lavender field. On the back was a small line of writing. "Love is not an excuse to run, but the courage to fight." Suddenly, hoofbeats echoed again on the beach. Thinking it was the Count's men, Isabella hid behind a rock, only to see Leonel riding toward her. His cloak was torn in several places. Blood stained his face, but the light in his blue eyes still shone brightly. "I knew you'd wait for me." He dismounted and wrapped his arms around her, as if trying to merge her into his very being. "Your wounds." Isabella gently touched his bleeding arm, her voice full of concern. "Just minor injuries." Leonel waved it off with a smile. "The Count has been driven away. He won't dare come again." But they both knew this was only temporary peace. As long as the Count lived, and as long as the prejudice of the church and nobility remained, true tranquility would always elude them. The woman in red urged them on. "The ship is about to leave. Hurry, or it will be too late." Hand in hand, Leonel and Isabella stepped onto the gangplank. As the sails rose, they looked back, seeing the coastline of Provence and the lavender fields shimmering under the moonlight. There were their meeting, their promises, and their unyielding courage to fight against the world. The sun of Sicily burned hotter than that of Provence, filling the air with the scent of citrus and salt water. Leonel and Isabella settled in a coastal village. He earned a living repairing boats, while she sold embroidered tablecloths at the market, always adorned with lilies of the valley and lavender. Their lives were simple and peaceful, like any other couple in town. Each morning, Leonel would walk hand in hand with her along the shore, watching fishing boats return. In the evenings, they would sit beneath grapevines, he reading the Romance of the Rose to her, she tending to the wounds he'd acquired during the day's work. Yet beneath this calm surface lurked danger. One day, a French merchant arrived in town and recognized Isabella immediately. "Aren't you the princess of Vitry Castle?" he exclaimed. "The Count has offered a reward for you. 100 gold coins for whoever brings you back." Leonel swiftly positioned himself between Isabella and the merchant, his hand gripping the hilt of his dagger. "You're mistaken," he said coldly. "My wife is just a humble embroiderer." Though the merchant clearly doubted him, he wisely backed off upon seeing Leonel's fierce expression. That night, Isabella couldn't sleep. She knew that as long as they lived, the Count would never stop hunting them. "Maybe we should go further," she whispered, "to a place where no one knows us." Leonel took her hand and pressed it against his chest. "As long as we are together, anywhere can be home." He paused, then added with a sudden smile, "Besides, I have an idea." The next day, Leonel went to the local blacksmith and ordered 2 identical rings, each engraved with a small rose. He slipped one onto Isabella's finger and said seriously, "From today onward, you are no longer a princess, and I am no longer a knight. We are simply husband and wife, Leonel and Isabella." Looking at the ring on her finger, tears welled up in Isabella's eyes. She understood that this ring was more than just a symbol. It was a declaration of their defiance against social prejudices. No matter who they once were, now they were simply each other's lovers. Day by day, the townspeople gradually accepted this foreign couple. They praised Isabella's embroidery and admired Leonel's tenderness toward his wife. No one knew their past. No one cared about their status. Under the Sicilian sun, they could finally love freely, like ordinary people. One spring, 5 years later, a man dressed in a monk's robe arrived in the village. He walked with a cane, his steps slow and unsteady, his face lined with wrinkles. Yet there was a serene calmness in his eyes. When he saw Leonel and Isabella, tears suddenly streamed down his aged face. "My children, I've finally found you," he choked out, his voice trembling. "I am the priest from Vitry Castle. I was sent by your father." Leonel and Isabella were both stunned. They hadn't expected anyone to find them, even after 5 long years. The priest reached into his robes and pulled out a letter, handing it to Isabella. "This was written by your father before he passed away. He said he was wrong. He should never have bound your happiness with an engagement." Isabella opened the letter, her eyes filling with tears as she recognized her father's familiar handwriting. The letter explained that Count of Champagne had been killed by an angry mob of peasants during his pursuit of them. His excessive grain levies had stirred up widespread outrage. Her father also wrote that he had petitioned the Pope to pardon Leonel's so-called crimes and officially acknowledged their marriage meant. With the Count dead, the priest smiled gently. "No one in France will come after you anymore. You can go home now." Leonel and Isabella exchanged glances, each seeing hesitation in the other's eyes. Their life in Sicily was happy and peaceful. Yet deep inside, they still missed the lavender fields of Provence and the cloisters of Vitry Castle. "Let's go back for a visit," Isabella whispered softly, "but only to see it's here that our home truly is." They followed the priest back to France. Much had changed at Vitry Castle. The new lord had abolished many harsh policies, and the people's lives had improved significantly. In the monastery cloisters, monks still prayed beneath the stone walls, where the saints' statues seemed unchanged from those distant days. When they arrived at the lavender fields of Provence, they saw a familiar figure, a woman in red, now aged, but whose laughter still rang like silver bells. "I knew you would return," she smiled. "This field belongs to you now. I've had someone take care of it all these years." Standing in the center of the flower field, Leonel and Isabella gazed across the endless sea of lavender, their memories returning to that night of escape. They had endured so much hardship, so many separations. But in the end, they had found each other again. This medieval love legend, spanning thorns and roses, is ultimately a hymn to both breaking free and holding firm. From their fleeting glance on the tournament field to their life and death bond in the lavender fields, Leonel and Isabella's love constantly defied the hardest chains of their time. The chasm of social status, the shackles of etiquette, and the oppression of power. When noble pearls and a knight's wolf tooth met under the moonlight, when forbidden monastery books resonated with the gypsy silver bells. They proved that love is not a fragile rose confined to a greenhouse, but a wild vine thriving among thorns, its roots deeply embedded in the soil of freedom, its petals reaching toward the light of courage, Marguerite's betrayal and redemption, the red-clad woman's outlaw loyalty, and even the priest's belated forgiveness elevate this story beyond a simple romance. They remind us that medieval darkness was never devoid of human complexity. Some wavered between gold coins and conscience. Others guarded true love with the wisdom of wandering. And some, like Isabella's father, only realized before death that their daughter's inner light was far more precious than family glory. In the end, the sunlight of Sicily and the lavender of Provence offer the simplest definition of happiness. When Leonel exchanged his curved sword for ship repair tools, and Isabella traded her princess gown for a merchant's embroidered cloth, they shed the armor of legend and lived out love in its most authentic form. Not the fairy tale of knights rescuing maidens, but two souls standing side by side against fate's storm, whispering, "We walk this path together." Perhaps medieval chronicles rarely record such stories. They prefer tales of war and intrigue. But those loves that grow through stone cracks, those hands tightly clasped in defiance of the entire world, are precisely the gentlest footnotes in history, like the rose and lily of the valley carved on their tombstone, unnamed yet eloquent. They teach every passerby this truth. What truly transcends time has never been titles or wealth, but the courage to love, to live, and to become oneself, even if it means being beautifully, defiantly out of step with the times. If you'd like to hear a second story, I'll tell you the second one to lull you to sleep. This tale is a legend from Sherwood Forest. In the morning mist of the 12th century, Robin Hood crouched in an old oak tree, watching the sheriff's tax collectors oppress the common people. Knights in red cloaks swaggered with arrogance, and black-robed scribes wore the church's emerald rings. They not only plundered money, but also carried out the conspiracy of the Inquisition. The morning mist in Sherwood Forest hides too many secrets. Robin Hood squats on the branches of an old oak, watching the tax collection team pass through the forest path. The leading knight's boot heels are inlaid with silver pieces, cutting through the mist like tiny beams of light, just like the chains that swayed on the gallows 3 years ago. Those were the last images his father, Sir Robert, the former sheriff of Nottingham, left to the world. The one in the red cloak, watch his bulging waist. Friar Tuck's voice emerges from a tree hollow, carrying the sourness of ale. This former monastery brewer always likes to squeeze himself into the narrowest places, claiming he can hear God's whispers, though Robin suspects he just wants to steal the cheese hidden in the tree hollow. Robin doesn't respond. His fingers are rubbing the spiral pattern on the arrow shaft, carved from yew wood core, with the fragrance of resin still lingering from last autumn. The arrowhead was modified from a horseshoe by Little John, its edges polished bright, but deliberately leaving a serrated edge at the tip. This will make wounds difficult to heal, perfect for dealing with these merciless tax collectors. When the tax collection team stops by the stream, Robin counts their numbers: 7 knights, 12 soldiers, and a clerk in black robe, who is scribbling something on parchment with a quill pen. The hem of the man's cloak is stained with fresh mud, which Robin recognizes as the special black soil from the monastery garden. They had just robbed the monastery's food supplies last week to help the displaced villagers whose homes were burned down. Watch the clerk's ring. Little John's axe suddenly extends from the bushes, with ivy leaves hanging on the blade. Silver, set with an emerald. Robin's bowstring tightens. Emerald rings are marks of the church court, meaning the tax collectors are not only collecting taxes, but also executing religious judgments. He recalls the corpse of a woman he found in the forest last month, her hands nailed to a cross, with a similar ring mark on her finger. The taxmen start beating a woodcutter who tries to resist. His firewood scatters everywhere, and from a split oak log, half of a linen cloth embroidered with a deer pattern appears. That's Robin's mark for the displaced people, who can receive food deep in the forest with this token. When the first arrow pierces the wrist of the knight in the red cloak, the morning mist happens to be blown away by the wind. The silver arrowhead carries the fragrance of yew wood and nails into the oak trunk. Blood beads slowly climbing along the spiral grooves like small red snakes. It's Robin Hood. The clerk screams and dives into the shield formation of the knights, dropping his quill pen into the mud, where the ink spreads out like black flowers. Taking advantage of this, Robin fires his second arrow, aiming at the clerk's ring. The vibrating sound of the bowstring startles a flock of crows, whose black shadows sweep over the rising sun, casting transient crosses on the ground. Little John's axe splits the first shield while Robin jumps down from the branch. His green cloak spreads out while running, brushing past dew-covered ferns, water droplets splashing onto his leather boots, mixing with the taxmen's blood rolling into the leaf litter. For 3 years, the soles of his boots have worn grooves, containing seeds of all plants in the forest. This is his map, and also his tombstone. When the last knight is tied to a hawthorn tree, the clerk is using his teeth to bite the ring on his finger. Robin steps on his wrist and discovers that the emerald is actually colored glass, inside which there's a rolled-up piece of parchment. The sheriff of Nottingham wants to burn the forest. Friar Tuck unfolds the parchment, his fat fingers stained with ale, leaving a blurred mark on the words, St. John's Day. With tar and sulfur saying it's to purify the pagans, Robin's fingertips trace the wax seal on the paper, which bears the family crest of the Sheriff of Nottingham. 3 ravens tearing apart prey. He remembers the day his father was executed. The sheriff wore the same crest ring, personally putting the noose around his father's neck. Did you find where the tar is stored? He asks the rescued woodcutter. The man is using his teeth to untie the ropes, spitting out bloody foam staining the deer-patterned linen. In the monastery cellar, the woodcutter replies, spitting out a broken tooth. I saw them transporting 10 carts in there last night, guarded by a knight in silver armor with a white feather in his helmet. Robin's bowstring suddenly hums. White feathers are the mark of the Knights Templar, a group that should be fighting in the Holy Land. Yet they appear here, guarding the tar. There must be a bigger conspiracy behind this. He recalls his father's last words before death. The emerald contains a key that can open all prison doors. They find a letter in the clerk's inner coat pocket. The handwriting in Latin is messy and frantic, mentioning cleansing the heretics in the forest and searching for saint. Mary's tears. What shocks Robin most is the signature at the end. Your brother, William. That's the name of his missing younger brother for 3 years. Burn him. Little John's axe glints in the sunlight. Heretics deserve purification by fire. Robin holds back his axe. The clerk's neck has a rusty cross engraved with an M on the back. He recalls his mother's name, Margaret. Her cross had the same engraving, melted into her rib cage when she was burned at the stake. Tie him to the mistletoe tree. Robin puts away his bow and arrows. The fragrance of yew wood mixes with the smell of blood entering his nose. Let the forest decide his fate. When they disappear into the depths of the forest with the stolen taxes, the clerk tied to the tree suddenly sees the mistletoe leaves begin to glow. The white berries seep transparent juice, dripping onto his hand. The burning sensation is exactly like what he felt on the stake years ago. He finally understands why Robin chose this tree. Mistletoe is the holy tree of pagans. Those bound here will never receive God's salvation. Deep in the forest, the camp is hidden under giant ferns. More than 50 refugees are gathered around Friar Tuck baking bread, making peculiar shapes with acorn flour and wild honey over the fire, resembling crumpled parchment. When Robin distributes the stolen money, he notices a woman in a blue hooded cloak. Her hood is pulled low, revealing only a pair of shoes embroidered with silver thread. That's the style of noble women, with traces of white lime from the monastery corridor on the toe. She escaped from Nottingham Castle. A crippled veteran whispers, his amputated leg wrapped with Robin's old cloak. Yesterday, when the moon reached the top of the oak tree, she came in holding an injured hawk. Suddenly, the woman lifts her head, and as her hood slides off, Robin sees the brand on her collarbone. A rose surrounded by flames, the mark used by noble families to punish runaway maidservants. But what shocks him more is her eyes, with a faint golden ring around the iris, just like his mother's eyes in the portrait. Sir Robin Hood? Her voice carries the distinctive rolled R of monastery Latin. And the hawk in her arms suddenly spreads its wings, revealing the word Marion carved on the wing bone. Robin nearly drops his arrow. Marion is the niece of the Sheriff of Nottingham, the girl who should have married him on the day his family was condemned 3 years ago. Everyone said she had died in the castle fire. The hawk is the sheriff's messenger. Marion unfastens the message tube on the hawk's claw. A dried lavender falls out. He wants to sacrifice your head on St. John's Day, saying it can stop the Black Death. Friar Tuck's bread drops into the fire. Has the Black Death returned? Not the Black Death. Marion's silver-threaded shoes spark slightly in the dirt. Something worse. The sheriff is raising green monks in the cellar, using human blood to brew holy water, claiming it grants immortality to nobles. Robin recalls the stained glass ring, suddenly understanding why the religious court was involved in tax collection. They weren't cleansing heretics. They were gathering sacrificial victims. When the moon reaches the top of the ferns, the injured hawk suddenly lets out a mournful cry. Marion lifts her cloak, revealing an iron key hidden underneath, the deer pattern on the handle gleaming in the moonlight. That's Robin's family crest. This was stolen from the Green Monk. Her fingers trace the grooves on the key. It can open the sheriff's secret cellar, but it needs 2 people to turn it because the handle contains 2 drops of blood. Robin takes the key, his thumb pressing a hidden mechanism taught to him by his father. My blood and my brother William's blood. The hawk's mournful cry turns into a scream. Everyone looks up, seeing a green smoke column rising in the direction of Nottingham Castle. That's the signal made by burning yew sap and human bones. The sheriff knows they're here. Marion's hawk suddenly convulses. The word Marion on its wing begins to bleed. Robin tears off its feathers, finding a small crystal ball under the skin, inside which terrifying scenes float. Displaced people chained, large vats filled with blood, and a monk in green clothes stamping a boy's forehead with Robin's family crest ring. That's William. Robin's bowstring suddenly breaks. He's still alive. When the crystal ball shatters under the moonlight, everyone hears a tree falling deep in the forest. The army of the Sheriff of Nottingham has begun cutting down trees. Their axe sounds mixed with some strange chanting, like countless snakes flickering their tongues. Marion's silver-threaded shoes suddenly sink into the earth. Robin reaches out to pull her, but finds a transparent thread wrapped around her ankle, the other end leading to the dark part of the forest, shining like spider silk in the moonlight. They followed me. Marion's golden irises begin to contract. The sheriff's wizard used my hair to create a tracking spell. Little John's axe swings toward the thread, but when it touches, green flames erupt. Friar Tuck quickly sprinkles holy water, but the flames burn even brighter, drawing a huge circle on the ground, trapping everyone inside. Robin shoots 3 arrows, the arrowheads carrying the fragrance of yew wood, nailing into the flame circle, forming a triangular gap. Lead the women and children out from here. His green cloak expands in the wind, revealing the family crest sewn on the lining. I'll go meet the green monks. Suddenly, Marion grabs his wrist, her nails scratching 3 blood streaks on his skin, the blood beads surprisingly flowing toward the flame circle like being attracted by a magnet. Don't go. Their holy water is made from your blood. Your family blood has some magical power. The flames suddenly turn green, reflecting the silhouettes at the forest edge. Those monks in green robes are approaching with crucifixes, their faces hidden under hoods, only their hands exposed, skin red like soaked in blood. Robin recognizes the badge on the leader's chest. It's the cross of the Knights Templar, but painted in eerie green. 3 years ago, it was this order that seized his family property. And at that time, their commander said the blood of the Robert family contained pagan impurity. The chanting of the green monks grows closer, and the flame circle begins to shrink. Robin stuffs the iron key into Marion's hand, then pulls out his father's long sword, the deer pattern on the scabbard coming alive in the green light, as if trying to jump out of the wood. Remember the location of the cellar. His sword tip picks up a burning branch, drawing ancient runes on the ground taught by his mother. These are Saxon symbols for seeking forest protection. When lavender blooms under the moonlight, use the key to open the 3rd stone door to the north. Marion's silver-threaded shoes spark on the rune. I'm going with you. You must survive. Robin's long sword cuts through the flames, the chanting of the green monks suddenly turning into screams. Tell William I'm waiting for him to come and take revenge himself. When the first ray of sunlight penetrates the ferns, the refugees have already been safely relocated to the depths of the forest. Robin leans against a charred oak, watching the bodies of the green monks twist in the flames. After their green robes burn away, silver threads embroidered underneath become visible. That's the secret mark of the Knights Templar, and also the embroidery pattern favored by his younger brother William. Friar Tuck hands Robin a piece of burnt bread. Marion was right. There really is something in their blood. He uses his sword tip to lift a piece of monk's remains, the bone fracture surfaces strangely green, just like the holy water in the sheriff's cellar. Robin thinks of his mother's dying words. Our ancestors weren't Christians. They were guardians of the forest. When the church bells ring, our blood will guide us home. At that time, he thought it was just the ramblings of an old woman. Now he sees his own blood beads rolling on the sword blade, eventually seeping into the wood grain, blooming into a small green flower. Horse hooves sound from afar. Robin's new bowstring tightens. This time he aims at the crows circling above the forest, those trained messengers of the sheriff, staring at everything with obsidian-like eyes. In the crow's pupils, he sees the spires of Nottingham Castle smoking, the flag of the Knights Templar rising over the monastery, and a young man in green clothes cutting his palm with a silver dagger, dripping blood into a crystal bottle. On that person's collarbone, there's a birthmark identical to Robin's, a small fern plant. The monastery cellar was deeper than imagined. Mary Ann's silver-threaded shoes stepped on the stone steps, echoing faintly and startling the bats resting on the vaulted ceiling. She held a stolen monk's lantern. The glow was filled with countless dust particles. Upon closer inspection, they were tiny bone fragments ground into powder, the remains of sacrificial victims. Third stone door to the north, she murmured, recalling Robin Hood's instructions, her fingers feeling along the damp stone wall. The deer emblem on the key handle pressed painfully against her palm, reminding her of their wedding night 3 years ago when Robin had used the same seal to stamp his family crest onto her silk handkerchief. He had said then, "When we have children, I will let them inherit this forest." A pungent smell seeped through the crack in the stone door. It smelled exactly like the back kitchen at Nottingham Castle, where deer meat was processed. Mary Ann moved the lantern closer and noticed Latin inscriptions above the doorframe. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, purify all impurity. Yet, in the shadow of the torchlight, those letters twisted into another form, the Saxon blood ritual runes her mother had once seen in forbidden books. As the key slid into the lock, she heard the sound of chains dragging from behind her. A boy crouched in the corner, iron shackles embedded in his thin ankles, dripping blood onto the straw that sprouted small green shoots. A fern-shaped birthmark adorned his collarbone, glowing faintly under the firelight, a mirror of Robin Hood's. "William?" Mary Ann nearly dropped the lantern. The boy suddenly lifted his head. His eyes showed none of the timidity expected of a child, only an unsettling darkness beyond his years. "The sheriff said you would come." His fingernails were stained dark red, as if he had just clawed something alive. He also said Robin Hood wouldn't dare come himself. Mary Ann tightened her grip on the key handle. This wasn't the William she remembered. The boy who always followed Robin Hood around, making little bows and arrows out of yew branches. The youth before her wore a sneer, his teeth carrying a faint trace of blood. "You're helping them brew holy water?" She stared at the large vat behind the boy, where a funnel still clung to its rim, half clogged with coagulated dark red liquid. William suddenly lunged for the key, but the chain snapped taut, allowing Mary Ann to see the brand on his wrist. The Templar cross, its edges still pink with fresh injury. "That's not holy water. It's an antidote," he snarled, his nails scratching across Mary Ann's hand, leaving 5 bloody streaks. "Our family carries a curse in our blood, one that can only be suppressed by the heart of a pagan." Suddenly, the stone door trembled. Mary Ann hurriedly turned the key. The grinding of iron teeth accompanied her hearing a familiar chant, the monk's prayers, though now more urgent like a call for ritual. "They're coming." William suddenly quieted, pointing to a hidden compartment at the bottom of the vat. "Hide the key inside. Remember, only during a full moon, when 2 drops of blood fall on the key, can it unlock everything." As Marianne opened the compartment, a strong lavender fragrance wafted out. Inside lay a piece of embroidered cloth bearing Robin Hood's family crest in silver thread, and in one corner, a small M, a part of her dowry meant for her groom on their wedding day. "What is this?" "My mother's keepsake." William's voice lowered, the chains scraping against the stone floor with a grating sound. "She gave it to me through a jailer before being burned alive." At the moment the stone door burst open, Marianne shoved the key into the compartment. Rushing in first was a green-robed monk wielding a crucifix, his robe hem smeared with fresh soil. She recognized it as the black earth from the edge of Sherwood forest. Robin Hood must have passed through here. "Grab the witch!" The monk's voice rasped like a rusty door hinge. As the silver chain of the crucifix swung, a dagger hidden beneath his robe glinted. "The sheriff wants her alive, to sacrifice on St. John's Day." Marianne turned and dashed toward the vat. Just before being caught, she hurled the entire container of holy water at the monk. The crimson liquid splashed onto the green robes, immediately steaming and eating into the skin underneath. The silver-threaded cross embroidered beneath the fabric became visible, marked the initiation symbol of the Knights Templar, stitched clumsily as if sewn by a child. "You are cursed too," she realized aloud as she was forced down. "The sheriff uses your blood to brew the holy water, yet tells you it's purification." The leading monk suddenly pulled off his hood, revealing a face mostly eaten away, his left eye a hollow socket stuffed with lavender flowers. "We volunteered." His breath whistled through missing teeth. "For family honor, what's a little pain?" Marianne's silver-threaded shoe slipped off during the struggle, revealing the brand on her ankle. When the flower-shaped tattoo caught the monk's gaze, he shrieked in terror. "It's the Earl's daughter. She's not dead." Amidst the chaos, William somehow broke free of his chains. Clutching a sharp shard of stone, he slashed at the monk's throat, his collarbone fern birthmark gleaming under the firelight, almost oozing green blood. "Run!" he shouted, pulling Marianne toward the hidden compartment. Droplets of blood from the stone shard dripped onto the ground, causing the tiny bone fragments there to stir. "Robin Hood has set traps at the edge of the forest. We can escape through the monastery's drainage tunnel." As Marianne followed him into the passage behind the compartment, she heard the sheriff's furious roar. The fat man was stepping over monks' corpses, holding a crystal vial containing shimmering silver-blue liquid, an exact match for the green blossoms blooming on Robin Hood's sword. The tunnel reeked of lavender and decay. William's chains clanked noisily in the confined space. Marianne suddenly noticed strange symbols etched into the rings, Saxon runes meaning sacrifice and rebirth, which her mother had once taught her to read. "Did you put these chains on yourself?" She grabbed the boy's wrist, noticing the peeling branded skin revealing normal flesh beneath. "Are you pretending to be controlled?" William dropped his stone shard. "The sheriff knew Robin Hood would come to rescue me." His voice cracked. "Half the green-robed monks are coerced peasants. We agreed to revolt on St. John's Day." But someone needed to stay in the cellar to destroy the last of the holy water. The drainage grate was entwined with ivy, which Mary Ann recognized as the special kind found in Sherwood forest, bearing scraps of a green cloak, Robin Hood's mark. As William pried open the gate with a stone shard, she saw the moonlight filtering through the leaves outside, weaving a silvery net on the ground. The lavender is blooming. Mary Ann suddenly stopped. In the clearing beyond the grate, purple lavender stretched endlessly, glowing faintly under the moonlight. In the center stood a stone tablet, split in two by an axe blow, with yew twigs tied to its top with a piece of cloth bearing Robin Hood's family crest. It's Robin Hood's signal. William's eyes lit up. It means they've taken control of the monastery perimeter. As they crossed the lavender field, Mary Ann's bare feet were pricked by the stems, leaving drops of blood on the petals that caused them to glow faintly. She recalled Robin Hood's words. The blood of the Saxons allows plants to speak. Now, she seemed to hear countless whispers singing softly, like the ancient lullabies her mother once sang. Suddenly, an arrow flew from behind an oak tree at the forest's edge, grazing William's ear and embedding itself in the lavender field. The silver tip gleamed in the moonlight, its fletching made of Robin Hood's signature green raven feathers. Stop! Little John's booming voice came from behind the trees, the sound of his axe chopping through brush growing louder. All green-robed monks must die. It's me! Mary Ann quickly raised her lantern, its glow illuminating William's distinctive birthmark. It's William! Little John halted mid-swing. The towering former blacksmith stared at the birthmark on the boy's collarbone, then knelt heavily on one knee, slamming his iron gauntlet onto the ground. Young master, we've searched for you for 3 years. William dropped the stone shard. He looked at the scar on Little John's wrist, inflicted 3 years ago while protecting Robin Hood from a knight's blade, bandaged then with Mary Ann's silk handkerchief. Where is Robin Hood? His voice trembled, the chains dragging through the lavender field, carving deep furrows. To draw off the main force of the Knights Templar. Little John pointed toward the bell tower. Those silver-armored madmen are heading deep into the forest with 20 carts of tar, claiming they'll burn every heretic before dawn. Mary Ann suddenly gripped William's wrist. Green liquid was seeping from his brand. Your curse is acting up again? The boy curled in agony among the flowers, digging his nails into the earth. It happens every full moon. His eyes turned green. The sheriff says it's God's punishment, but Mother said, it's the forest calling us home. Suddenly, the bell tower rang, scattering roosting crows. Mary Ann looked up and saw a knight in silver armor atop the tower, white plumes on his helmet gleaming under the moonlight. His long sword held aloft a green cloak, its lining embroidered with a silver-threaded deer crest dripping blood. It's the leader of the Knights Templar. Little John's axe groaned in his grip. 3 years ago, he personally hanged Sir Robert. William abruptly rose from the ground, ignoring the dragging chains as he ran toward the tower. I'll kill him. His voice grew hoarse, the birthmark on his collarbone writhing like a living thing. Mother's ashes are still in his armor. Mary Ann caught up with him, noticing green liquid oozing from his palms, leaving trails on the ground where small yew saplings sprouted. She thought of the embroidered cloth in the hidden compartment and suddenly understood Robin Hood's plan. Not to destroy the holy water, but to awaken the ancient power sleeping in the land, using the blood of the two brothers. The spiral staircase inside the bell tower was littered with green-robed monks' bodies, their cloaks neatly laid on the steps like a green carpet. As Marianne stepped on them, she noticed each piece bore the same sun symbol, Saxon runes identical to those on William's chains. They died willingly. William suddenly paused, pointing at the monks' clenched fists, each gripping lavender roots. It was our secret signal, meaning readiness for sacrifice. At the top of the bell tower, the silver-armored knight waved the green cloak like a banner. Moonlight reflected off his visor, casting shadows of Marianne and William. When they reached the final step, the knight slowly removed his visor, revealing a face covered in green spots, his left eye entirely green. "My two dear children." The knight's voice sounded like it was squeezed through rusted pipes. Finally reunited. Marianne dropped her lantern. The face vaguely resembled the sheriff of Nottingham. But there was a noticeable indentation on his forehead, the spot where Robin Hood had shot him 3 years ago, believed by everyone to be fatal. "You didn't die?" William's chain snapped tight, crushing the stone shard in his hand. "What about that fire?" "I was reborn in the flames." The sheriff's green eyes fixed on William's birthmark. "Like your mother, consumed by fire, becoming part of the forest." Suddenly, tearing open his armor, he revealed a branding mark, a flame-shaped rose matching the one on Marianne's collarbone. "You think this is punishment?" "No, it's the mark of the Saxon royalty." William's chains fell apart. They scattered across the ground, forming an ancient Saxon altar pattern. Was Mother's curse fake? It was a blessing. The sheriff's green patches spread. He gestured toward the distant Sherwood forest, its edge glowing faintly green under the moonlight. The Robert family wasn't condemned. They were awakened. When the blood of the two brothers falls on the altar, the sleeping forest guardian will awaken, purifying this Christian-tainted world. Marianne suddenly recalled the green bloom on Robin Hood's sword. It wasn't magic. It was ancient power awakening within their bloodline, just like the vines emerging from the cracks in the bell tower, wrapping around the sheriff's armor and blooming with small white flowers, Saxon sacrificial blooms. Does Robin Hood know? She grabbed William's wrist. Green liquid dripped from his fingers, pooling into the iron ring design on the ground. The sheriff laughed so hard, the bell tower shook. He thinks he's defying me, but he's been following my plan all along. His sword suddenly pointed at Marianne. "Including letting you live until now, the last princess of the Saxons." William blocked Marianne just as Robin Hood's arrow flew through the window, piercing the sheriff's shoulder. The silver-tipped arrow, scented with yew wood, lodged into the tower beam, blood crawling upward along its spiral grooves like a green snake. "You didn't plan for me to bring help, did you?" Robin Hood's green cloak appeared at the window, his bowstring still vibrating. "Like the villagers you turned into sacrifices, or the survivors whose villages you burned." Outside the tower, shouts erupted. Marianne saw countless torches lighting up from the direction of Sherwood Forest, forming a fiery dragon encircling the woods. The sounds of Little John's axe, Friar Tuck's chanting, and the exiles' horns mingled, drowning out the Templars' prayers. The sheriff pulled the arrow from his shoulder, green blood spraying onto the iron ring pattern. The rings began to heat up, burning black marks into the stone floor, matching the deer crest of Robin Hood's family. "It's too late." His green eyes flashed with madness. The bloodline has awakened. The forest will consume everything. Suddenly, William grabbed the fallen arrow and stabbed his own palm. As green blood dripped onto the central ring, Robin Hood leaped in through the window, slashing his palm and sprinkling blood onto the same spot. The moment the two drops met, the entire tower shook violently. Vines burst from the cracks, rapidly growing to tightly wrap around the sheriff's armor. The white sacred flowers burrowed into his armor seams, blooming brilliantly on the green patches. By the time the first rays of sunlight touched the tower, the sheriff's body had transformed into a yew tree, its growth rings embedded with a single burnt rose petal. Marianne watched as William and Robin Hood's hands healed, leaving scars forming a complete deer crest. At the forest's edge, the green glow faded, replaced by torchlight, where exiles sowed seeds in the lavender fields. Seeds poured from Robin Hood's boots, finally returning the children of the forest to their rightful land. As Little John's axe shattered the last Templar shield, Friar Tuck served ale from a stolen communion chalice. The green-tinted drink, mixed with yew juice and honey, tasted like spring to all who drank it. There's something hidden in the tower foundation. William suddenly pointed to a crack, where green liquid seeped out, crystallizing into gemstones. Mother's diary. Robin Hood pried open the stone slab with his sword, revealing a bronze box. Inside were yellowed parchment scrolls that, upon contact with his blood, revealed Saxon script in her mother's handwriting. It recorded the secret of the Robert family. They were not cursed pagans, but forest guardians left behind by the Romans during their invasion, their bloodline capable of communicating with plants. The Templars had long sought them to create eternal holy water. The final sacrifice isn't St. John's Day. Robin Hood traced the final lines with his finger. It's when the blood of the two brothers mixes with the princess's tears, awakening the Saxon forest to drive all foreigners back to the sea. Suddenly, Marianne felt warmth on her cheek as a tear fell into the bronze box. Upon meeting the green liquid inside, it crystallized into a transparent gemstone, within which floated visions of the ancient Saxon homeland. No castles, no churches, only endless forests and children running between the trees, bearing fern-shaped birthmarks. As the bells of St. John's Day rang, new yew trees sprouted at the edge of Sherwood Forest. Robin Hood and William stood side by side beneath the tallest, their green cloaks fluttering in the wind, their silver-threaded deer crests shining in the sunlight. Marianne's silver-threaded shoes stepped into freshly turned soil, her ankles flame rose brand fading, replaced by a small lavender blossom, the forest's mark on her. Nearby, Little John chopped wooden stakes to build an altar without a cross. Friar Tuck brewed beer using the monastery's bell, claiming it would allow plants to sing. Exiles cleared small plots in the woods, planting seeds mixed with soil from Robin Hood's boots and rust from William's chains. The sheriff was right about one thing. William touched the tree rings, still bearing traces of the sheriff's green patches. We did gain rebirth through fire. Robin Hood's arrow suddenly shot into the sky, startling a flock of crows flying toward Nottingham Castle, their wings dusted with golden pollen from lavender flowers. But not to become anyone's weapon. His bowstring still vibrated, the scent of yew wood mingling with the fresh aroma of new leaves. To become guardians of the forest, like our ancestors. Marianne gently brushed the tree bark, where a small green shoot emerged. She knew this wasn't the end, but a new beginning, the secrets buried in the earth. the powers flowing in their bloodlines, would eventually bloom eternally under the moonlight of Sherwood. On the 7th day, when yew trees bloomed, a messenger from Nottingham Castle stormed into Sherwood Forest. Mud from the Trent River clung to his riding boots, clearly indicating he had crossed the river illegally. The parchment scroll was tightly tied to an arrow shaft, and the lion emblem on the green wax seal had swollen from rainwater, with half a piece of mistletoe still hanging at its edge. A mark of royal secret messengers. 3 years ago, when Robin Hood's father was executed, the messenger who brought the imperial decree also carried the same plant. The king himself will come to crush you. The messenger's voice trembled like reeds in the wind. He stared at the deer-shaped scar on Robin Hood's palm and suddenly knelt down. His Majesty says, "Surrender the last heir of the Saxon nobility, and the forest outlaws may be spared." Mary's silver-threaded shoes stepped on the dagger dropped by the messenger. The gemstone on the hilt refracted a rainbow under the sunlight. She recognized it as the marking of the armory in Nottingham Castle. Last winter, they had stolen 20 crossbows from there and distributed them among the frostbitten refugees for self-defense. A noble heir? Little John's axe suddenly struck the oak root near the messenger's feet, scattering wood chips. His old scar on the wrist turned red. We only have poor people driven to desperation here. As Robin Hood unfurled the parchment, green sprouts were growing along the lines of his fingers. In the Latin decree issued by the king, the words "Saxon heretics" were circled 3 times in vermilion ink. At the end, a burning gallows was drawn, beneath which stood a figure wearing a green cloak, bearing a fern-shaped mark on the collarbone. His fat fingers made the sign of the cross over his chest, accidentally knocking over some yew branches nearby. The needles curled up like tiny fists. I knew getting involved with pagan power would bring no good. Mary picked up a curled needle leaf and found that it gradually unfolded in her palm, revealing tiny golden patterns. Saxon star charts. Her mother once said these represented the wrath of the forest, not disasters, defenses. She traced her finger across the messenger's boots. The river mud contained tiny shells. The king has brought a fleet. They want to burn the forest after sailing down the Trent. Suddenly, an eagle cry echoed from deep within the forest. Mary looked up and saw the male eagle whose wing bone was engraved with Mary, circling above the yew tree, holding a burning piece of cloth in its beak. The lion emblem on the cloth was already burned to just a claw, with tar sticking to the edges, a marking of naval fire ships. They'll attack on the night of the full moon. Robin Hood stuffed the parchment into a crack in the bark. The fragrance of yew wood suddenly became intense. The messenger arrived 3 days early, intending to make us panic. William was sharpening arrowheads with stone shards. He carved yew branches into sharp shapes and soaked them in lavender juice. The green liquid climbed along the wood grain and condensed into tiny ice crystals at the tip. Mother's diary says our Saxon ancestors could make trees march. He suddenly cut his palm and dripped blood into the soaking solution. Perhaps we can do it too. As dusk fell, the outlaws began digging trenches at the edge of the forest. Mary walked behind them, sowing seeds. Those seeds collected from the soil on Robin Hood's boots were mixed with stored yew fruits from last winter. When the first seed sprouted under the moonlight, she heard a faint cracking sound underground. It was the bones of the outlaws burned to death 3 years ago. now emerging again, entwined in roots. These trenches will become traps. Little John carved markings on the oak trees with his axe. His blade was smeared with pine resin, and amber sap oozed from the bark where it passed. When the king's cavalry steps in, the tree roots will entangle their horses' legs. Friar Tuck approached, carrying a large beehive. Bees crawled like golden whirlpools on his monk's robe. Stolen from the beekeeper at the monastery. His wine-flushed nose was swollen from stings, yet he grinned, showing his teeth. These little creatures hate the smell of armor most. When Robin Hood inspected the last archery tower, he found Mary staring blankly at a crystal. It was a gem formed from her tears and Saxon blood. Inside, the image of the ancient homeland was changing. Ships appeared at the forest's edge. The royal flags on the masts were burning, and soldiers below held torches dipped in tar. Their fire ships are hidden in the reeds. Mary slid her fingertip across the crystal. The images suddenly froze on a man's face, wearing a crown. The king is leading in person. His armor is embedded with emeralds, just like the ring in the church court. Robin Hood's bowstring suddenly resonated. He recalled his father's final words before execution. There's a tear-stone of the Saxons on King Lionheart's crown. Back then, he thought it was madness. But now he realized that the emerald might actually be a relic of the Saxon nobility, capable of suppressing the forest's power. When the full moon rose to the treetops, horns sounded from the direction of the Trent River. Mary buried the crystal in the trench. The newly sprouted yew saplings suddenly grew wildly, weaving green canopies under the moonlight that covered the entire forest. Through gaps in the leaves, she saw countless floating lanterns on the river's surface, approaching like fallen stars. First squad archers to the left flank. Robin Hood's arrow was already on the string. The yew arrow shaft slightly warmed in his hand. Remember, shoot the horses, not the men. We need living prisoners. William suddenly grabbed his wrist. The last page of Mother's diary described a strange ritual. The green wen on his palm pressed against Robin Hood's scar, both wounds simultaneously exuding greenish fluid. Someone must stand at the center of the altar, feeding their heart to the yew tree, to awaken the oldest guardian. Mary's silver-threaded shoes stepped on the writhing roots. No one shall be sacrificed. Her voice choked back tears. A white flower suddenly sprouted where the crystal was buried. Its petals bore the pattern of the Saxon royal family's flame rose. We can use another way, such as King Lionheart's emerald. The floating lanterns on the river suddenly accelerated. Robin Hood saw a gilded cage hanging on the mast of the flagship ahead. Inside was a vaguely visible figure dressed in green, with a fern-shaped birthmark on the collarbone glowing in the firelight. A boy about William's age, yet possessing the exact same face as Robin Hood. Does the sheriff have another son? Little John's axe chopped through a suddenly emerging root. Greenish fluid seeped from the roots, forming small streams on the ground. That's impossible. 3 years ago, all aristocratic children were burned when we searched the castle. William dropped his stone shard. That's not human. His voice was frozen by cold winds. It's a puppet made from the bones of Templars and Saxon blood. Mother's diary depicted it. They call it a blood doll, capable of imitating anyone's appearance, including our birthmarks. As the fire ships collided with the shore, Mary suddenly understood the king's scheme. Those floating lanterns were merely bait. The real army was infiltrating from the marshland on the other side of the forest. Their armor was coated with tar, and their boots were bound with burlap to avoid making noise and to facilitate ignition. They intend to trap us inside a ring of fire. She dragged Robin Hood toward the altar. Yew roots were forming paths underfoot. The white sacred flowers turned toward her as she passed, like guiding directions. The images in the crystal weren't prophecies. They were warnings. The king intends to pollute the foundation of the forest using the blood doll. When the blood doll was released from the cage, it stood atop the ancient Saxon altar. Wearing Robin Hood's green cloak, it raised a beating heart. Silver blue liquid flowed through its veins, identical to the sheriff's holy water. As it lifted the heart overhead, the yew trees around the altar began to wither. Green leaves turned gray-black, one by one. Destroy its heart. William Stone's shard, soaked in lavender juice, shot toward the blood doll, but evaporated instantly upon contact with its cloak. Its core is that emerald. Robin Hood's arrow pierced the blood doll's chest. The emerald suddenly emitted blinding light. Countless green rays shot from the gemstone, striking trees that exploded into agony, roots twisting painfully on the ground. He saw his own hands turning transparent, the deer-shaped scar fading like ink washed away by water. My blood is losing effect. Robin Hood knelt, the yew arrow slipping from his fingers. This gem absorbs the power of the Saxons. Its face melted, revealing underlying bones. The princess of the Saxons. King's laughter came from outside the ring of fire. His iron armor gleamed in the flames, the emerald pendant on his chest resonating with the altar's gem. The withered yew trees suddenly resumed growing, but now spreading inward, they were corrupted, devouring their own home. Give me the gem. The king's sword pointed at Mary. The emerald on his crown was actually transparent crystal containing half a drop of black liquid. Otherwise, every forest in England will become a graveyard. William suddenly sliced open his palm with a stone shard. Green blood dripped onto the altar. The corrupted roots halted their spread, curling protectively around his feet. Mother said Saxon blood can both awaken and purify the forest. His eyes glowed green. The birthmark on his collarbone blossomed like a flower. But someone must become the vessel. As Robin Hood's arrow aimed at the king's emerald pendant, William had already embraced the remains of the blood doll. The bones merged with his skin, gem fragments drilling into his bloodstream, flowing like luminous streams beneath his skin. Tell Mary I'll become part of the forest. His voice grew distant, his body transforming into a new yew tree. Arrow holes immediately appeared on its trunk, mimicking Robin Hood's archery skills, just like Mother. Mary's tears fell onto the emerald. Red liquid trickled into the cracks, forming new patterns inside, not flame roses or deer scars, but a flower combining both symbols. When she pressed the gem onto the yew tree William had become, the entire forest fell silent. Flames ceased spreading. Corrupted roots crystallized, turning into transparent gems, enclosing absorbed Saxon power. The king's army couldn't move within the crystallized forest. Their armor was entangled in roots. The tar solidified upon contact with the crystal. Soldiers holding torches became crystal statues, still maintaining their igniting posture. Only the king's sword remained alight, but the flame turned golden, burning a cross-shaped gap into his emerald pendant. King Lionheart's gem is broken. Little John dropped his axe. They'll live forever in the forest, his voice choked. just like all sacrificed Saxons, becoming part of the Guardians. Friar Tuck collected the green liquid in a communion cup. The liquid condensation into small emeralds in the cup. Sunlight revealed moving light spots inside, resembling fireflies in the forest. Mary's tears and the gem fused, producing new power. He handed the cup to Mary. Perhaps this is what Mother's diary called balance. Neither destruction nor indulgence. When the first ray of sunlight pierced the crystal forest, Mary's silver-threaded shoes stepped on a transparent gem. Inside was the king's emerald pendant. The cross-shaped gap was slowly healing, and the absorbed Saxon power was returning to the forest. Suddenly, she remembered what Robin Hood said. True guardianship isn't destroying enemies, but making them understand the rules of this land. The outlaws began dismantling the roots around the crystal statues. Transparent crystals were carefully excavated and used as boundary markers buried at the forest's edge, inscribed in Saxon script, "Whoever enters with fire shall become part of the forest." Little John's axe was transformed into a hoe. He cleared a small plot of land beneath the yew tree William had become, and sowed lavender seeds, which sprouted instantly upon contact with green liquid. Robin Hood's arrow shot into the sky as the eagle returned with a burning royal flag. The lion emblem on the flag was burned to just a tail. Yet upon landing, it transformed into a swarm of golden bees flying into Friar Tuck's hive. Those bees that once attacked soldiers now brewed honey with a lavender aroma. The king won't give up easily. Mary caressed the flame rose on her collarbone. The tattoo had completely turned green, matching the color of the yew leaves William had become. He'll return with more troops. Robin Hood's bowstring held a new yew arrow. The arrowhead was polished exceptionally smooth, reflecting the deer scar on his palm and Mary's green rose. "Then let them come." His arrow suddenly flew, piercing clouds. Instantly, every tree in Sherwood forest turned, branches aligning in the wind to form a giant deer pattern. The forest is ready. 3 months later, the first yew tree grew on the ruins of Nottingham Castle. When the first leaf of Crystal Forest landed in Robin Hood's palm, a black ship sailed up the River Trent. The Pope's crest on the sail gleamed coldly in the sunlight, edged with iron chains. This was the flagship of the Inquisition. The Holy Bone, which had carried the pyre that burned Maid Marian's mother 3 years earlier on an English coastal tour. "A bastard from Rome." Little John spat, his hoe digging open a new crystal statue where a soldier remained frozen in the act of drawing his bow. Think they can be masters of the forest just by hanging a cross? Robin Hood's fingers traced the eyes of the statue. Those rotating pupils suddenly froze, reflecting the scene on the ship. 20 priests in red robes were transporting a huge iron cage, inside which vague wings flapped, feathers leaking through the bars, scattering in the wind like white fragments. It's Bishop Gregory. Marian's silver-threaded shoes clicked crisply on the crystal floor. Last year he burned 300 heretics in Yorkshire, and it's said he can make corpses testify against their associates using holy oil. Brother Tuck suddenly covered his nose. "They're burning asphalt?" His fat finger pointing at the river, black oily film spreading toward the forest. Not to start fires, but to dispel the forest's spirit. The smoke from asphalt suppresses Saxon bloodline powers. The yew trees deep in the forest began trembling. The ancient tree that William had become dropped needles carpeting the ground, each one bearing tiny ice crystals. what Mother's diary described as the omen of sorrow, foretelling that a Saxon royal bloodline would leave the forest forever. They want her alive. 3 arrows lined Robin Hood's bowstring, the fragrance of yew mingling with asphalt fumes. Judging by the cage size, it's for Marion. As the ship dropped anchor, Bishop Gregory stepped ashore, his red robe embroidered with golden crosses, his staff topped with a black crystal through which sunlight projected distorted human shadows on the ground. Those shadows bore demon horns, yet wore monk's robes. Sir Robin Hood. The bishop's voice sounded like sandpaper rubbing stone, his black crystal suddenly turning toward Marion. The Pope is merciful, offering one last chance for repentance to the remnants of the Saxons. A green glow emanated from Marion's collarbone. The flaming rosebrand was heating up. She could hear whispers from the crystal statues. Asphalt smoke had begun seeping in, causing the soldiers inside to melt, dark red liquid oozing from the crystal surface like congealed blood. What did you do to the heretics in Yorkshire? Her silver-threaded shoes suddenly sank into the crystal floor, roots weaving into a shield beneath her feet. Did those people you called demons all become ingredients for your holy oil? The bishop's black crystal suddenly exploded. Among the flying shards appeared teeth, small ones showing baby tooth characteristics, numbering over 100. It is said, purification requires sacrifice. His fingernails scraped the blood groove on his staff, just as you Saxons used children as offerings to the forest. Robin Hood's arrow pierced the bishop's robe. When the silver arrowhead tore the golden cross, countless fireflies emerged from the tear, their wings glowing green in the sunlight, forming ancient Saxon incantations, the protective spell Marion's mother had taught her, capable of revealing lies. The bones from Yorkshire are still in the monastery cellar. Through the firefly light, piles of skulls appeared, each bearing cross-shaped chisel marks on the cranium. You fed the bone marrow to the black crystal, calling it God's blessing. Bishop Gregory suddenly laughed aloud. He tore open his robe, revealing a chest luo yin, a fern birthmark identical to William's, though scorched black by branding irons. A traitor among Saxons. I am also of the Robert family. My mother was a bastard daughter driven away. The yew trees in the forest simultaneously emitted a humming sound. The ancient tree transformed from William suddenly cracked, revealing half a face inside. Exactly the uncle from the Robert family branch, burned 3 years ago, whom Robin Hood had never met. He speaks truth. Marion's crystal suddenly slipped from her bosom, splitting into 2 on the ground, the images inside transforming into numerous burning fern birthmarks. The blank pages in Mother's diary recorded the family split secret. Your great-grandfather executed all collateral branches when fighting for the Saxon throne. Little John's hoe suddenly struck the bishop's staff. Sparks flew as metal collided. His old wrist scar resonated with the bishop's birthmark, 2 green lights intersecting in midair, forming a complete Saxon star map. So, you helped the Romans for revenge? The bishop's dagger pierced Little John's shoulder. Green blood splattered onto the crystal floor, causing the melting statues to stop flowing, re-solidifying into harder crystals with faces of Yorkshire victims surfacing. Revenge? No. His black crystal, saturated with blood, began emitting silver threads. I will turn every forest in England into crystal, making all Saxons live in eternal pain. When the first whiff of asphalt smoke entered the forest, Marion suddenly understood the opponent's plot. The bishop's black crystal wasn't a weapon suppressing bloodlines, but an amplifier. It could absorb Saxon power, then convert it into energy destroying the forest, similar to the sheriff's holy water, only 100 times more effective. Destroy his crystal. She pulled Robin Hood toward the yew tree, roots forming stairs under her feet, the white holy flowers wilting in the smoke. William's arrow hole. Only our mixed blood and tears can activate the ancient tree's defense. Bishop Gregory's staff swept forward. The black crystal shooting beams that hit the ancient tree transformed from William. The sap oozing from the arrow holes solidified into a green barrier blocking the asphalt smoke. But the sap rapidly decreased, the green glow beneath the bark dimming like a candle in the wind. The Saxon bloodline is almost exhausted. Aning Xiao appeared on the bishop's face, his fern birthmark glowing. In another hour, this tree will become my perfect crystal collection. Robin Hood's arrows rained down on the bishop's crystal, but were deflected upon contact. The silver tips fell to the ground, instantly corroded black by the asphalt smoke. The scent of yew wood gone. Our strength has no effect on him. His hand pressed against the tree's arrow hole, green shoots growing wildly along the grooves. He shares our blood. Suddenly, Marion bit her lip, letting blood drip into the tree's crack. White, holy flowers sprouted from the bark, encircling her in a Saxon sacrificial ring, each petal reflecting different faces. Yorkshire victims, refugees burned 3 years ago, and countless unknown Saxon ancestors. It's not about bloodline. Her voice echoed within the circle, the flaming rose at her collarbone blooming, green light piercing the smoke, projecting a massive image across the sky. It's belief. When the bishop's dagger aimed at Marion, all crystal statues shattered simultaneously. Soldiers emerged from them, armor still adorned with crystal fragments, eyes burning green flames. Leading was a knight in royal armor, with a cross-shaped scar on his chest. The very king's guard who had been pierced by Robin Hood's arrow through his emerald pendant. We are not prisoners. The knight knelt, his sword blade crystallizing with green frost. We are guardians chosen by the forest. Suddenly, the bishop's black crystal went out of control. The absorbed Saxon power began counterattacking, silver threads entangling his arms, leaving deep blood marks on his skin. Impossible! His fern birthmark started peeling off, revealing normal skin underneath. You should have been controlled by the Inquisition's holy oil. The holy oil contained Saxon blood. Marion's silver-threaded shoe crushed the bishop's wrist, the black crystal gradually melting beneath her foot. Brother Tuxale told us. The strength of those you burned seeped into the soldier's blood through the holy oil. Robin Hood's arrow finally struck the bishop's heart. This time the silver tip wasn't deflected, but pierced deeply, carrying all the crystal soldier's strength. The scent of yew wood cleared the asphalt smoke, and the ancient tree transformed from William suddenly sprouted new branches, blossoming with flowers combining both deer patterns and flaming roses. Mother said. Marion helped the fallen bishop up, a flicker of relief in his dying eyes. Saxons never seek vengeance, only redemption. When the black crystal completely melted, the holy bone suddenly caught green fire on the Trent River. Priests carrying iron cages screamed in the flames, their red robes burning white, revealing hidden Saxon star maps. They too were coerced descendants of the bloodline, unaware themselves. 3 months later, a yew forest grew on the ruins of York's Abbey. Each trunk bore a small cross-shaped scar where heretics were executed. Nearby refugees claimed that on full moon nights, a knight in a green cloak could be seen shooting arrows in the woods, his arrows always avoiding seedlings while hitting crows, whose feathers became new yew seeds upon touching the ground. Marion's silver-threaded shoes tread on Nottingham Castle's ruins, now hosting a new altar. At its center lay the bishop's black crystal remnants, sealed in a crystal stone, surrounded by Saxon and Latin inscriptions, both languages conveying the same message. The forest belongs to all who believe in it. Little John's hoe became an ironwork signboard, painted green with an axe and yewberry. He took dozens of apprentices, former crystallized soldiers, crafting farm tools with tiny fern patterns, said to ensure drought-free land. Brother Tuck's brewery opened beside London Bridge. Each barrel bore a yew branch, and drinkers saw floating green feathers in their cups. Robin Hood's arrow fletching, also the forest's mark for honest folk entitled to free food from Sherwood. Robin Hood's final public appearance occurred at an ancient Saxon altar. His green cloak billowed in the wind, silver lining turned gold, harmonizing with Marion's flaming rose. When he shot an arrow skyward, all English forests hummed, yew trees turning simultaneously, branches forming a giant protective canopy sheltering villages. Later, bards sang that Robin Hood neither died nor left. He became the wind of Sherwood Forest, Marion the flowers, William the guardian tree. When the poor faced oppression, lavender-scented arrow feathers appeared on windowsills. When noble armies approached, their horses' hooves suddenly tangled in roots. Most talked about was the yewberry legend. Each red berry contained a small emerald, born from Saxon tears. Robin Hood's gift reminding people true wealth isn't gold or silver, but courage to protect home. Centuries later, during the Industrial Revolution's smog-laden era, Sherwood's yew trees remained lush. Axes rusted near them. Railway surveyors got lost in mists until seeing a green-cloaked knight's shadow guiding them back. In London's British Museum, a special crystal stone resides. Inside, an ever-blooming flower combines deer patterns and flaming roses, glowing faintly green under moonlight. Labeled artifacts of unknown civilization, night guards claim hearing bowstring sounds from the stone at silent midnight, and a woman's whisper teaching someone to recognize forest directions. May these stories bring you a warm night's dream, a dream filled with the fragrance of lilies of the valley under medieval moonlight, and the breeze that carries the swish of arrows over Sherwood Forest. May they bring the courage to resist constraints, the faith that sincere hearts can break through thorns, and that justice will eventually pierce the darkness. May they bring a gentle longing for freedom and bonds, so that every beating heart can find its own wilderness in these tales. Good night.